Close your eyes for a moment and listen to the wind howling across the fjords. Not a storm, not the sea, but the whisper of a name carved into steel, sung around fires, and feared across kingdoms. She was never meant to sit at a loom. She was meant to stand in the shield wall. In an age ruled by men, she chose a different fate, not out of rebellion, but out of destiny. Born beneath the northern lights, baptized by blood, and guided by the gods, she would rise to become more than a warrior. She would become a legend. This is her story. And for the next few moments, it's your story too. The wind howled that night, not like the gentle sigh of the forest, but like wolves hungry at the door. Snow fell in great silent waves across the pine-covered hills of the north. Inside a longhouse lit only by fire and fate, a woman screamed into the night, a scream of life, of labor, of something ancient being summoned into the world. And then a cry. Not the frail wail of an ordinary newborn, but something deeper, stronger. A cry that silenced the room. A child had been born, and with her, a storm. The midwife, hands trembling, lifted the slick red bundle into the firelight. A girl, she said. There was a pause, brief but loud. For in this world, girls were expected to spin flax, raise children, serve the hearth. They were not born to fight. They were not born to lead. But this girl, she was different. An old vulva, a seeress draped in animal skins, her face lined with the cracks of time, stepped forward. Her eyes, one clouded white, narrowed. She traced the child's shoulder with a crooked finger and stopped. There, she whispered, that mark shaped like Gungnir, Odin's spear. The room stiffened. This child bears the sign of the Valkyrie. She will not stitch. She will not serve. She will fight. The silence in the longhouse deepened. The father, a towering figure silhouetted by fire, a seasoned warrior named Bajorn Ironside, stepped forward. He had hoped for a son. Every warrior did. But in that moment, as he took the child into his calloused hands, something shifted. He held her up toward the smoke hole in the roof, toward the swirling aurora in the skies above. She will carry my mother's name, he declared, voice echoing. A Shieldmaiden, a fighter, a daughter of fire and frost. Outside, the northern lights danced, green and violet curtains rippling across the heavens, as if the gods themselves had paused to bear witness. It was an omen, and the elders would remember it. That night, as the child suckled at her mother's breast, the longhouse echoed with tales of heroes and blood, of women who had once fought beside kings, of battles not yet fought, but already written in the stars. This was her beginning. Her earliest memories would not be of lullabies or dolls. No, they would be of firelight flickering across carved wooden beams, the crackling of the central hearth, and the distant beat of war drums echoing from the hills. Her cradle, unlike others, was made from a warrior's shield, one her father had taken from a fallen enemy. And the songs her mother sang were not lullabies, but sagas. While other girls were taught to card wool, she was taught to walk the ridge with balance and silence. While her friends learned to knead bread, she learned to sharpen blades. And in the hush of winter nights when the snow buried the world in silence, her mother would sit beside her, fingers weaving braids into her wild blonde hair, whispering stories of legendary shield maidens, of Hervor, who claimed her father's cursed blade, of Lagertha, who rode into battle beside Ragnar. There have always been women who chose the sword, her mother said, her voice soft but strong. It's not the easier path, but it's yours, if your will is stronger than your fear. The girl listened. She believed. When she was 5, she tried to lift her father's sword, a broad piece of pattern-welded steel, taller than she was. She couldn't raise it an inch. Her arms shook, her knees buckled. She fell with a thud. Her father, watching from the shadows, laughed, a deep sound like thunder across the fjord. Too heavy yet, little Valkyrie, he said, but not forever. He knelt and handed her something instead, a small wooden knife, carved smooth, wrapped in leather. Start here, he said. Every blade has a beginning. She kept it with her always, even while she slept. By 7, she could swim in the icy rivers and climb the pines barefoot. She knew which berries were safe, how to snare rabbits, and how to track deer through snow. Her body, still small, had already learned discipline. Her spirit, wild, yes, but focused. When a traveling skald visited their settlement and sang of Valkyries descending from the sky to choose warriors for Valhalla, he paused midway through his tale, looked into the flames, then turned to her. There, he said, pointing, sits a girl the gods will one day call by name. The warriors laughed, but she didn't. She sat, unmoving. She believed him. That night, she dreamed of ravens circling overhead, of blood, of her own name being spoken, not in fear, not in pity, but in awe. And then came the cold winters, the ones that claimed the weak and spared only the strong. The harvest failed, the fish vanished, hunger became a second skin. Her belly ached, her hands trembled. But she endured. She watched the old die, she helped bury them. And when spring finally came, it wasn't joy she felt, it was resolve. Strength, she learned, is not just holding a sword, it's surviving the storm. That storm lived inside her now. A quiet, burning storm. By 9, she trained daily. The boys laughed at first, called her names, mocked her stances, her sighs, but their laughter died quickly. She never quit, never cried, never stayed down. The weapons master, a one-eyed veteran named Haken, watched her without expression, until one day after she disarmed a boy nearly twice her weight, he spoke for the first time. "She's not a girl," he said. "She's a blade being forged." And he was right, because something ancient stirred in her bones. Not rage, but rhythm. Not hatred, but hunger. Not for blood, but for purpose. She was not born to be someone's wife. She was born to walk the path of warriors. Born under the sign of Valkyries. Born with steel in her spirit and fire in her veins. This was not rebellion, this was prophecy. Training did not begin with a sword. It began with falling, and falling again, and again. Because before you could stand in a shield wall, you had to learn how to fall without breaking, how to roll with the strike, how to rise before the enemy could finish what they started. She learned quickly. Each morning before the sun rose over the fjords, she ran along the shoreline barefoot, breath sharp against the icy air. She carried buckets of water up steep, frozen hills, not to prove anything, but because warriors carried weight. Warriors endured discomfort. Warriors didn't wait to be stronger. They made themselves strong. And when the village slept, she practiced her forms by firelight, high guard, middle guard, low guard, step, strike, block, breathe. Again, every move she drilled into her bones. Not for show, for survival. Not everyone approved. The old women clucked their tongues when she passed, dirt on her knees and sweat in her hair. "She'll never find a husband," they whispered. "What man would want a wife who thinks she's a warrior?" But she wasn't thinking it. She was becoming it. Her mother heard the whispers too. And one evening, as she wrapped salve over her daughter's blistered palms, hands more used to blades than braids, she spoke softly. "I chose to be a mother," she said, "but I never laid down my bow." Her voice grew quieter. "The winter before your birth, I stood atop the palisade while your father was away, and I sent 5 Saxons to the gods with my arrows. Your father respects my aim, as I respect his sword." She met her daughter's eyes. "You will choose your path too. That's what makes you a shield maiden. Not the weapon, not the scars, but the right to choose." By 11, the girl had outgrown her wooden blade. On the first day of spring, the weapons master handed her a new one. Heavier, longer, balanced. Not a toy. Not a gift. A test. "You're ready," he said. That was all. But coming from Haken One Eye, it might as well have been a song sung by Odin himself. She trained now not just with the sword, but with every weapon in the Viking arsenal. The axe, heavy and wild, perfect for breaking shields. The throwing axe, precise, fast, silent like a whisper of death. The spear, elegant and deadly. The seeks, a single-edged blade made for close combat. And the shield, not just for defense, but for striking, pushing, surviving. Each became an extension of her body. Each had a rhythm. Each had a truth. But the most brutal lesson came with cloth tied over her eyes. "In battle," Hakan growled, tightening the knot behind her head, "smoke and blood may blind you. You must learn to see with your ears, your skin, your instincts." He circled, silent, watching, waiting, then a strike, a tap to the ribs. "Dead," he said. Again, a strike to her thigh. "Dead." And again, until her frustration boiled into fury. But slowly, quietly, she listened. She felt the shift in air, the creak of leather, the weight of silence before violence. And on the 12th attempt, she raised her wooden sword and blocked. Then again, and again. When the blindfold came off, Hakan was watching her differently now. Not as a girl trying to keep up, but as a warrior in the making. She wasn't only trained in war. She studied the weather, how clouds warned of storms before they broke. She memorized the stars, how to navigate without a map, only moonlight and instinct. She learned which plants could kill and which could save a life in the field. She memorized runes and sagas because history wasn't a luxury, it was a weapon, and warriors who forgot it died repeating old mistakes. The boys who once mocked her now approached with caution. Some still bested her, for now, but she learned their patterns, their habits, their tells, what they relied on, what they feared. One of them, Leif, the shipbuilder's son, became something more. He was taller, faster, stronger, but never once went easy on her, and she loved him for it. After their fifth sparring match, which left her bruised and winded, he laughed. "When we're grown," he said, offering his hand, "we'll go raiding together. The skalds will sing of us." She grinned, swept his legs, and dropped him flat on his back. "They'll sing of me first," she said, wooden blade to his throat. He laughed, not in mockery, in awe. It was the first warmth she'd felt that wasn't from fire or training. At 12, her father brought her to the forge. The heat was blinding, the air thick with metal and smoke. The smith handed her a real weapon, a seax, smaller than a sword, but heavy, sharp, real. The handle was leather-wrapped, a single amber bead set in its hilt, her name carved in runes along the blade. "A warrior's first true companion," her father said. "May it taste blood only in necessity and honor." That night, she slept with the blade beneath her pillow, not out of fear, but out of promise. The village no longer asked if she would fight. Now they asked when. And she, child of winter, fireborn, fate-marked, waited, not with doubt, not with fear, but with certainty. She would not only stand in the shield wall, she would lead it. The childhood of a warrior is not made of games. It is carved from pain, forged through discipline, sharpened by silence, and sealed by choice. She had chosen, and the gods were watching. It wasn't supposed to happen that way. Not her first kill. Not with the sun barely up and her hair still damp from the river. Not alone. Not yet. But fate doesn't wait for readiness. It strikes like a blade in the dark, sudden, cold, final. She was 14. Too young, some said, to join a raid. Too young, others whispered, to understand what blood costs. But none of that mattered the morning the horns sounded. It was supposed to be quiet. Her father's fleet had left at dawn. 20 longships vanishing into the mist, bound for the eastern lands. The village was left with the old, the very young, and those not yet ready. She was one of them. She'd gone to the stream for water, carrying buckets with arms that had trained for years. The sky was clear, the wind sharp, the world felt calm. Then came the sound. That sound every Viking knows in their bones. The horn. Not the one that signals return, the one that screams danger. She dropped the buckets, didn't think, just ran. By the time she reached the edge of the settlement, chaos had already begun. Smoke curled into the morning sky, the wooden palisade broken. Men poured through, 20 or more, raiders, wolves smelling blood. She saw her mother first, standing on the roof of the great hall, bow-strung, eyes deadly calm. "Stay close," her mother shouted, loosing an arrow that dropped a man mid-charge. Her voice didn't tremble. So neither did the girl's hands. She reached for her seax, her real blade. Not the wooden toys of childhood, not the blunted edge of training. Steel, cold, honest. She gripped it tightly. This time it wasn't practice. There would be no second chances. She moved through alleys between buildings, just as she'd been taught. Low, fast, controlled. Then she saw him. A man, bearded, blood-spattered, breaking from the fray, his eyes sweeping for stragglers. He spotted her. Just a girl, he must have thought. Easy. He raised his axe and charged. Her body didn't freeze. Her fear didn't scream. All those years of drills, bruises, and blisters took over. She ducked. The axe whooshed over her head. She stepped in, close, and drove her seax up into his ribs. The sound was awful, like leather tearing, like wet wood cracking. His breath caught. His eyes, blue like hers, widened in surprise. Maybe at the pain, maybe at the blade, maybe because he realized he was dying. And it was a girl who killed him. He fell, hard. Her hand was covered in his blood. She stood there, trembling, blade still in her grip, watching the life drain from his eyes. It was the first time she'd ever seen death up close, and it had come by her hand. There was no time to process it, no moment to grieve. Another shout. More fighting. She kept moving. The settlement held, barely. Old men grabbed axes they hadn't touched in decades. Mothers fought with pitchforks and fire. Even boys, too small for real weapons, hurled rocks and screamed like wolves. Together they pushed the raiders back. Bloodied, broken, humiliated, the enemy fled into the trees. And then Silence. That night, the fires burned low. Not in celebration, in mourning, in exhaustion. She sat by the shore, scrubbing her blade, scrubbing her hands. The cold salt water stung, but the blood wouldn't come off, not really. She stared at the horizon, waves black as ink rolling in slow and steady. She didn't cry, she didn't speak, until her mother sat beside her, not with words, not with comfort, just presence. Her hands, too, were stained. Her shoulders carried the same weight. They didn't need to say it aloud. This was what it meant to be a shield maiden. Not just the glory, not just the cheers, but this, the silence after the storm. When her father returned days later, victorious and carrying spoils, he was met not with songs but with the news. The village had stood, held its own, and his daughter had blooded her blade. At the feast that night, with mead flowing and warriors recounting both victories and losses, he stood and raised his horn. My daughter, he said, killed her first man defending our home, not in rage, not in madness, but with purpose, skill, and courage. He turned to her, his voice full of pride and awe. She is no longer training. She is no longer someday. She is now. The longhouse erupted in cheers, the pounding of mugs on tables, the rhythm of approval. But she didn't smile, because in her mind, she could still see those eyes. She could still feel the weight of that moment, and yet she didn't regret it, because she had made her choice, and the gods had watched. First, blood changes you. It sharpens you, hardens you, but it also breaks something inside you, the child who never knew what killing felt like. She buried that version of herself by the shore that night. Let the tide take her away, and in her place stood a warrior, not just in name, but in truth. Winter passed slowly, not because the snow fell thicker that year or the winds howled louder through the pine trees, but because she was waiting, waiting for spring, waiting for the call, waiting for war. She was 15 now. Her Sikhs had tasted blood. Her training no longer questioned, her path no longer doubted. But one thing still remained. She had not yet set sail, not yet raided foreign lands, not yet faced the real fire. That would change. The announcement came with the thaw. The shipwright finished a new longship, 70 feet of oak and iron, its prow carved into the open mouth of a snarling dragon. She was named Vogaskurf, Wave Cutter, and when the Jarl named the raiding crew, her name was read aloud. Some eyebrows rose, some mouths curled, but no one spoke against it, not after what she'd done. She packed her chest the next day, clothes, her sharpening stone, dried herbs for wounds, and the wooden Thor's hammer her mother had carved for her as a child. On the eve of departure, she sat by the hearth, running her blade against the stone, watching it gleam in the low light. She did not sleep. Dawn broke sharp and clear. 40 warriors gathered at the water's edge, all men, save one. Her presence turned heads, some skeptical, some curious, but none dared challenge her right to be there. She wore leather armor reinforced with iron plates, lighter than chainmail, but built for movement. Her shield bore her clan's symbol. Her Sikhs hung at her side, and for the first time, a sword, gifted by her father, rested at her hip. The shipmaster, an old salt-bearded veteran named Gunnar Widebeard, eyed her. You pull your weight, he growled. No special treatment, no woman's excuse. She met his gaze without flinching. I wouldn't expect any. A flicker of approval in his weathered face. Then, bored. The rhythm of rowing was brutal. Hours of pulling through freezing waves. Salt stung her lips. The oar blistered her hands. She vomited over the side that night twice and woke with a back knotted like rope. But she never complained. The sea had no patience for weakness, and neither did Gunnar. But as the days passed, she found her rhythm. Muscle adapted. Calluses hardened. Her gaze turned forward. The coastline of home vanished behind them. Ahead lay glory, or death. On the 6th day, a shout from the lookout. Land, the Western Isles, a monastery visible on the cliff. Gold and silver behind those stone walls, men of God, but not men of war. That night, Gunnar gathered the crew. We strike at dawn, no burning until the valuables are secured, and no bloodlust before duty. Break that rule and you answer to me. There were nods, but as the firelight flickered across their faces, she couldn't stop her hands from shaking. This was it. No training, no mock fights. This was real. Leif found her alone at the prow. He said nothing at first, just stood beside her, listening to the waves. You're not afraid of the fighting, he said finally. She didn't deny it. No, I'm afraid of freezing, of failing, of shaming my name. He nodded. I threw up for 2 days before my first, thought I'd die of nerves. He smiled faintly. Then I killed 3 men before breakfast. He placed a hand on her shoulder. Warm, steady. You're ready. She wanted to believe him. So she did. At first light, the ship beached with a hard jolt. The warriors surged forward, a wall of muscle and war cries, and she, shield raised, sword drawn, roared with them. The cold water cut her legs like knives, but it jolted her fully awake. Time slowed. A monk swung across like a club. She sidestepped and knocked him out cold with the pommel of her sword. Another charged, eyes wide with fear, a blade trembling in his grip. She didn't hesitate. Steel met flesh. The sound was sickening, but her blade did not waver. The monastery fell quickly. The monks were brave but not trained. Some were taken as captives. Others lay still on the floor of the sacred halls. Gold chalices, silver crucifixes, rich tapestries, all gathered, packed, and loaded. The flames began only after the treasure was secure. She stood in the courtyard as the smoke curled skyward, her sword sticky with blood, her breath coming hard. Gunnar approached. "You're first?" he asked, motioning to her sword. She nodded. "You fought well." He handed her a cloth. "Clean it. Blood pits the edge." She hadn't even noticed the cut on her arm. Small, but it would scar. Her first real battle wound. She cleaned her blade in silence, checked the edge, then sheathed it with care. Behind her, the longhouse burned. The sky turned gray, but inside her, something glowed. The raids continued down the coast. 3 more settlements, 3 more victories. With each battle, she grew sharper, faster, more certain. The fear never left, not completely, but it changed. It became focus, an edge inside her. By the time Vogeskurf turned toward home, her name was no longer spoken with doubt. It was spoken with respect. Her share of the plunder included a silver arm ring, 2 captives, and a scar that would never fully fade. But her greatest treasure couldn't be held in hand. It was the knowledge deep and unshakable that she had walked the path and survived it, not as a girl chasing glory, but as a shield maiden standing among warriors. Her first raid had ended, but her legend had just begun. The wind off the Frankish coast was heavy with salt and smoke. It carried the scent of villages burning, of fear rising, and of something else: opportunity. By her 18th summer, she was no longer questioned when ships were named or when swords were counted. She was a known quantity, a proven warrior, a steady shield in the wall, but still, not yet, a name sung in foreign halls. That changed in a single hour. The raid had started well, too well. Their forces landed under moonlight, quiet and swift. They struck deep into a wealthy coastal town. Armored guards caught half-dressed, merchants running, churches emptied before bells could ring. Then, the alarm. From the hills behind the town, hoofbeats, dozens of them. Frankish cavalry, heavy, armored, and fast, thundered toward them, iron hooves chewing up the soil. The Viking warband scattered across the village had no time to regroup. She saw it before the others, the rising dust, the flash of steel helmets through trees. If they reached the town, the warriors would be caught between fire and slaughter. She didn't wait for orders. She ran, straight at them. At first, they didn't notice. Just one figure sprinting across a muddy field. Small compared to the riders, insignificant. Then she dropped low, slid beneath the lead horse, and as it passed over her, she struck, a clean, practiced cut, hamstringing the beast. It screamed, crumbled mid-stride. Its rider, a knight in full mail, flew forward, crashing down hard, ribs shattering beneath his own weight. Chaos! The cavalry faltered. Before they could regroup, Viking shields locked, the rest of her warband, now alerted, surged forward in a brutal counterstrike. The tide turned. What should have been a massacre became a rout. That night, the warriors feasted beside their ships. Fires lit the beach, mead flowed, and stories began to spread. Did you see it? She ran at the horses, cut one down like she was felling a tree. Or fate. Gunnar Widebeard stood, holding a horn of mead high. "I name her the Horse Fell," he roared. "The one who brought down thunder on foot." The warband echoed his cry, pounding shields. The Horse Fell! A new name, not one given at birth, not one whispered by seers. This was a name earned, in dust, in blood, in brilliance, and it would follow her across every coastline they touched. From that day on, she was treated differently, not just respected, feared, not as a curiosity, but as an equal. More than that, as a weapon. Commanders began to consult her, not just for her blade, but her mind. She saw patterns in chaos, knew when to strike, when to hold, when to feint. She wasn't the biggest nor the strongest, but she was precise, deadly, unrelenting. By 20, her arm rings clinked like wind chimes, silver, bronze, gold, taken from the dead, gifted by the living. Her shield bore her personal emblem now, a black raven in flight against a blood-red field. She wore a mail shirt stripped from a Frankish officer. Her sword's hilt was wrapped in silver wire, its pommel set with a single garnet, no longer a trainee's tool, now a weapon of legend. With each raid, her fame grew. With each scar, her authority deepened. And with each battle, she pushed farther from the girl who once hid behind firelight and silence, and closer to the warrior she had always been meant to become. Still, not everyone approved. Some men, particularly those from other clans, refused to follow her orders. They spat behind her back, grumbled that a woman should not lead warriors, but her results were undeniable. When she took charge of flank maneuvers, casualties dropped. When she proposed coastal decoys, plunder doubled. And when a vote was called in the Thing, the great assembly of free warriors, her voice carried weight. Real weight, not given, earned. She never boasted, never raised her voice unless in battle. But when she spoke, men listened. Even those twice her age. They didn't have to like her, they just had to respect her. And they did. Because they'd seen her in the shield wall, side by side, blades soaked, teeth gritted. They'd seen her charge horses. They'd seen her kill. And they'd seen her survive what others didn't. In one campaign, she led a detachment through marshes most believed impassable. They struck from behind enemy lines. No losses. Complete victory. And when asked how she navigated terrain even seasoned raiders avoided, she simply said, "I watched the birds. Where they walked, we followed. Where they didn't, we didn't step." It became a phrase among her warriors, "Follow the birds," or "Follow the horse fell." Either way, you made it home. But she wasn't just a killer. She was a symbol. For the women in the villages they passed through, daughters, wives, sisters, she became proof that the gods did not place limits on courage, that steel could belong in any hand so long as the grip was firm. Some whispered her name like prayer, others shouted it like a challenge, but none ignored it. This was the birth of a legend, not in prophecy, but in choice, in risk, in a single impossible moment when a girl ran toward horses and changed the shape of history. By the time she reached her 21st summer, her name was known far beyond her homeland, not just feared in the lands she raided, but respected across the Norse world. Men told her stories around hearthfires, women named their daughters after her, and skalds, wandering poets with voices like drums and hearts soaked in mead, sang her saga as though it had always been written in the stars. But fame is not leadership, and a sword alone does not command loyalty. That would be earned differently. It began with a whisper in the Longhouse. A new expedition was being planned, a bold eastern campaign. 5 ships, 150 warriors, not under a veteran chief, not under some old war hand craving one last conquest. No. The Jarl had named her. Her. To lead it. The room went silent when the announcement was made. Some stared, others exchanged skeptical glances, a few grumbled into their mugs. A woman? To command ships? To give orders in battle? But the Jarl's voice cut through the noise. The Horsefell has proven herself where others only speak. She doesn't ask to lead. She's earned the right. No one challenged it, not openly. That night, Leif came to her longhouse. His eyes, so often playful, now carried the weight of truth. "Gorm's speaking against you," he warned quietly. "Calls you a glory thief, says he won't follow a woman's command, nor will his men." She nodded, not surprised. "Let him stay behind, then," she said calmly. "I only want warriors who choose to follow, not those who must be dragged by the ego." It was a calculated choice, not weakness. If she forced them, she'd divide the crew before the voyage began. But if she offered them a way out, without shame, only the worthy would remain. By morning, Gorm and one of his men had withdrawn. The others stayed. Her first command was not a battle. It was a test. Could she hold their loyalty? Could she carry not just her own weight, but theirs? She didn't shout, didn't bluster. She planned. Met with each ship captain, studied maps until her eyes blurred, tracked tides, timed winds, calculated exit routes, fallback positions, flanking paths. She anticipated everything, except victory. The expedition sailed east toward the Slavic coastlines, toward rich trading posts nestled behind riverbanks and forests. The campaign lasted nearly 3 weeks. Minimal losses, maximum gain. She negotiated with chieftains through broken words and gestures. She outmaneuvered rival raiders by faking a retreat, then ambushing them in a narrow inlet. Silver, spices, furs. 5 ships returned home laden with wealth. But the true prize? Unity. They had followed her, fought with her, returned with her, and now they believed in her. The Jarl hosted a feast in her honor. She was seated at his right hand, a position usually reserved for bloodkin or honored seers. Even those who doubted her clapped. Some did so slowly, reluctantly, but they did. The skald stood to compose a verse on the spot. Shieldmaiden, not of shadow, but of storm. She sails with fire in her veins, and where others chase gold, she commands it. But the weight of leadership is different from that of armor. Heavier in silence, sharper in solitude. When her warriors slept, she stayed awake, replaying decisions. Which path was safer, which life could have been spared? She had no answers, only responsibility. She changed, not in heart, but in how she walked the world. Slower, more deliberate. She no longer fought to prove herself. She fought to protect those who trusted her. Back home, she trained not just with weapons, but with words. She spoke at the thing, the public assembly. She listened before speaking. When she did speak, her words were few, sharp, strategic, and the people noticed. Her authority was no longer tied to battle. It had become something deeper, something dangerous. Even other settlements began to send emissaries, seeking her advice, requesting her presence in alliances, and in some cases offering marriage. Not out of love, out of politics. A warrior like her was more than a legend. She was a bargaining chip, a potential queen. She declined every offer, graciously, respectfully, but firmly. My oath is to the sea, to my sword, and to my people, she told one envoy. I was not born to be bargained with. I was born to burn my own path. Leif remained by her side, her closest companion, her trusted second. They never married. They never needed to. What they had couldn't be named by law or sealed by ritual. It was forged in fire and sharpened by time. She was no longer just a warrior. She was a storm in stillness, a mind behind the sword, a leader. Not because she claimed the title, but because those who followed her believed in her. And in the end, belief is what builds legends. Not the blood spilled, not the gold won, not the name shouted in firelight, but the quiet, resolute conviction that when she stands, men rise. And when she speaks, even the gods lean closer. Legends are rarely born in comfort, and they are never sustained by peace. She had become a leader, a commander of men, a name sung from the Northern Isles to the Baltic trade posts. But one thing still eluded her: recognition from the old blood, the war-born houses, the great sons of Ragnar, and above all, from Ivar the Boneless. Ivar was not just feared, he was mythic, a warlord wrapped in madness and genius, known for cruelty so calculated it seemed divine. His enemies called him demon, his men called him god-touched. No one called him equal until her. Their paths crossed at the Thing, a great gathering of clans, warriors, and kings. Not for war, but for alliance, talks of uniting fleets for a massive raid into the west. She arrived with her warriors, cloaked in red, bearing her raven sigil, silent as wolves, and the murmurs began. She's here. Horse fell herself. Will she kneel to Ivar? She heard it all. She heard it all. Ignored most, watched everything. Then Ivar entered, carried on a war chair. His legs, twisted since birth, lay still, but his eyes burned like forged fires. Sharp. Cunning. He smiled like a man who knew 10 ways to kill you and might use 7 just for fun. He said nothing at first, just studied her from afar. And then, during the council, he spoke. You've spilled blood, Ivar said, voice like oil on stone. You've earned rings, but tell me, Shieldmaiden, do you lead men, or do they allow you to lead? The circle went quiet. Some smirked, some watched her. She didn't rise, didn't flinch. I lead, she said simply, because I do not ask permission. Ivar tilted his head. Then prove it. The challenge was issued in the old way. Holmgang. A duel. Not to the death, but to submission. No warbands, no politics, just blade against blade. She could have declined, cited the alliance, sought the high road, but she saw it in the faces around her. If she refused, she'd be remembered not for her victories, but for her silence. So she agreed. The duel was set for dawn, a ring of stones, witnessed by 30 warlords. The gods themselves, it was said, would be watching. She slept little that night, not from fear, but from clarity. This was not just a test of skill, it was a reckoning with the old world, with the ghost of every man who ever doubted her blade. The morning was cold. She stepped into the circle barefoot, no armor, just tunic, belt, blade. Ivar was already there, waiting on his knees, legs folded beneath him, two short-handled axes glinting in the mist. He smiled. Let's see what fire made you. The duel was brutal. She struck first, testing, quick. Ivar deflected, rolled low, swept a leg. She dodged. He lunged. She parried. He feinted high, then struck low, grazing her thigh. A warning. She bled, but barely. The crowd leaned in. This was not showmanship. This was war in miniature. Every move was a gamble. Every step a declaration. She circled him. He laughed. You move like a wolf, he said, panting. But I am the pit beneath the snow. He came again, full fury now. And for the first time she faltered. Not in technique, in purpose. Why was she fighting him? What did it prove? But then she remembered. Not him, them. The ones who watched. The girls back home sharpening sticks in secret. The boys told to dismiss her victories as luck. The old men waiting for her to fail, just once, so they could return to the old ways. This wasn't for pride, it was for the path, and in that moment, she saw the opening. Ivar turned for a wide strike. She dropped, spun under, drove her shoulder into his ribs. He collapsed. She rose above him, blade to throat, breathing hard. Do not ask permission, she said again. Silence. Then laughter from Ivar. Real, wild, sharp. He pushed himself up with a wince. Well then, he said, brushing dust from his arms, let the gods take note. That night the alliance was sealed. 5 clans, 10 ships, 1 war plan. And in the heart of it, her name, carved alongside Ivar's. The boneless and the horsefell, not as rivals, as equals. There are battles that change maps, and there are battles that change stories. This was both, because when she crossed blades with Ivar, she didn't just survive, she rewrote the myth. Every warrior has one final raid, one last voyage, one battle not marked on any map, but carved into fate itself. For her, it came not with fanfare, but with silence. No war horns, no drunken boasting, just a raven feather laid gently on her doorstep. She recognized the message instantly. An old ally, fallen captive in the far north, a chieftain she had once saved in battle, now imprisoned by a rival clan near the Glacier Sea. It wasn't her war. No coin promised. No favor owed. And yet, she packed her sword that night. Leif tried to stop her. You've done enough, he said, his voice thick. You've led fleets, fought legends, you don't need this. But she wasn't listening, because this wasn't about need. This was about honor, about the kind of woman she had always sworn to be, the kind who answered when the old gods called. The journey north was brutal. Ice formed in her hair. Wolves followed the ship from the shoreline for days. They passed villages buried in snow, entire homes lost to the white silence. But she pressed on. Each step forward felt heavier than the last. Not from doubt, from age. Her limbs, once spring steel, now ached in the morning. Her reflexes, still sharp but slower. She was no longer the girl who outran cavalry. She was something else now. Something older. Something colder. Something more. When she reached the enemy's stronghold, she didn't sneak. She announced herself. Alone, standing beneath the great gates, sword unsheathed, hair braided in battle knot. I come for Hroth, son of Elvar, she shouted. Send him to me, or send your best. The gates opened. Not to surrender, to challenge. A warrior emerged, young, fierce, armored in black iron, eager to make a name for himself. He smiled. I was told legends walked like men, he said. But you look tired? She didn't answer, just raised her blade. The duel was brief. 3 exchanges, 2 feints, 1 decisive strike, a slice across the young warrior's thigh that dropped him instantly. She stood over him. You want to kill legends? She asked. Start by surviving them. They let her pass after that. Hroth was chained inside a timber cell, bruised and half-starved. She broke the lock herself, carried him to the sled, and vanished back into the snow. They didn't pursue. Maybe they were afraid, or maybe they had seen something in her they couldn't explain. Something not quite human anymore. The return was slow. Hroth's wounds needed tending. The snows deepened. Food ran low. On the 12th night, they camped beneath the shadow of a frozen ridge. She built the fire, wrapped Hroth in furs, then sat alone, sharpening her blade, staring into the flames. And for the first time in years, she wept. Not for the pain, not for the past, but because she knew. This was her last voyage. Her body was tired in ways she couldn't fix. Her spirit ready, not to quit, but to return. The gods never promised long lives, only worthy ones. When they reached the coast, her ship waited, Leif at the helm. He didn't speak, just pulled her into a long, wordless embrace. She didn't have to say it. He already knew. A week later, the feast was held. Hroth recovered. The village sang her name. Even the Jarl stood to honor her. But she watched it all from a distance. She had walked too far into the storm to enjoy the firelight. That night, she climbed the hill above the fjord, alone, carrying nothing but her sword. The stars above were bright. The aurora shimmered like the breath of Valkyries. She whispered a prayer, not to Odin, not to Freya, to the wind, to the sea, to the girl she once was. And then she laid her sword down. She was found at dawn, sitting against the stone, eyes closed, peaceful, gone. No wounds, no struggle, just silence like a story finishing its final line. They buried her beneath the stones, not in a pyre, not in a hall, but at the edge of the world, where the sea crashes loud and the sky never forgets. They carved no name on the grave, only a single rune, fell. It meant downed in the tongue of warriors, but in her case, it meant risen. The Shieldmaiden's last voyage was not for gold, not for glory, but for loyalty, legacy, and love. And in the silence that followed, a legend became eternal. Long after her sword was laid to rest, she still rode the wind, not in flesh, but in story, in echo, in the aftersong. You could hear it, if you listened, in the snap of sailcloth over cold waters, in the hush before the horn blows, in the firelit silence when a skald draws breath to sing. They told stories of her in longhouses, of the girl who outran horses, who struck down raiders before her voice even deepened, who faced Ivar the Boneless and made him laugh in defeat. But over time, the stories changed. She stopped being a woman. She became something else, a spirit of vengeance, a ghost who rose with the mist, a raven who perched on the shields of those who doubted their courage. They said that if you whispered her name before battle, your hand would not shake. They said if you mocked her, your blade would slip. Mothers began to tell their daughters, "You are born under her star. You are not made of weakness. You are carved from her fire." Little girls tied their braids in her style, scratched her rune into wood, dreamed not of weddings, but of war. She had become something rarer than feared. She had become believed in, not just for what she had done, but for what she had meant. Proof that courage is not a man's gift, that steel does not listen to gender, that fate belongs to the bold. Even the skalds couldn't contain her. One poem became 20. Verses changed with each region. In the north, she was ice-born, kissed by snow unmelting. In the south, she was flame, a red-haired terror with laughter like thunder. In the east, she rode wolves. In the west, she walked barefoot across enemy blades, each tale more impossible than the last. Each one true in its own way. Because what is a legend, if not a reflection of the need behind the myth? And yet, for those who had truly known her, it was the quiet moments that returned. Leif, now older than any warrior had right to be, sat alone at the fjord's edge each solstice, never remarried, never left the village. He said little, but some nights after the mead had flowed too freely, you could hear him whisper to the waves, "She never chased glory, she just refused to run from it." In a faraway monastery, a Christian scribe once wrote of the red-haired Valkyrie who spared his life. He claimed she looked at him and smiled. She had seen no threat in him, only fear. He spent the rest of his life chronicling Norse gods, trying to understand a people who could birth such a woman. And in the decades that followed, more Shieldmaidens rose, not many, but enough. They painted her raven on their shields. They carried Seek's blades with curved hilts just like hers. They trained longer, fought harder, not to replace her, but to remind the world she had existed. Then, centuries passed. The Viking Age ended, the raids faded, the longships rotted, the gods grew quiet. But deep in the sagas, between Odin's tricks and Ragnar's wrath, she remains. A single thread, blood red, weaving through the cold gray of Norse history, not born of prophecy, not chosen by gods, but chosen by herself. This is the after song, not sung with instruments, but carried in hearts, in silence, in courage passed from mother to daughter, in the quiet strength of those who fight not for fame, but for truth. And that is the sound of a name that never dies. Time swallows even the strongest. Wood rots, steel rusts, bones turn to dust, but stories outlast kingdoms. Long after her ship sailed its last wave, after her name faded from the tongues of warriors, after even the skalds forgot the tune of her battle cry, she still lived, not in body, not even in memory, but in impact, in the quiet revolution of belief. Centuries passed, empires rose and crumbled, the Norse gods were pushed into myth. Their altars became museum pieces, their runes etched on necklaces instead of shields. But deep beneath the surface of civilization, something ancient stirred. A whisper, a spark, her legacy. She was no longer just a shield maiden. She had become a symbol of defiance, of discipline, of the sacred rage of women who will not be caged. You see it now. In the athlete who trains harder than her male teammates, not to compete with them, but to surpass the limits they never had to fight against. In the soldier on the front line, steel-eyed, steady-handed, carving her place in a brotherhood that never expected her to exist. In the mother who raises her daughter, not to be pretty, but prepared. And in the daughter, who one day stands her ground, face to face with fear, and doesn't flinch. The world may no longer burn longships, but the fire still lives. She lives in the protester who stands unarmed in front of riot shields, in the doctor who stays behind in war zones while others evacuate, in the quiet woman in the boardroom surrounded by suits who looks power in the eye and does not blink. No one carves her name in stone anymore, but it doesn't need to be because it's deeper now, into flesh, into will, into identity. Somewhere in the north, a little girl walks along a rocky coast. She's heard the stories, half real, half myth. They say a woman once stood on this very cliff, alone, unshaken. A warrior made not by prophecy, but by choice. The girl picks up a stone, sharp, cold, and for a second she sees it, a flicker of red hair in the wind, a shadow holding a sword, a smile that dares the world to test her. The girl doesn't know the whole story, but she knows this, that woman was possible, which means so is she. That is legacy. Not being remembered, but being repeated. The Shieldmaiden never asked to become myth. She fought to protect, to lead, to keep her word. But because she lived without apology, without hesitation, without permission, she lit a fire that would leap across time, from fjord to battlefield, from cradle to council hall, from saga to soul. She became a signal fire to every woman who ever felt the world tell her no, and decided to answer with, "Watch me." So tell the tale again, not for the past, but for the future, so that long after we're gone, somewhere in the silence, a girl might hear the wind call her name and know exactly who she is. And so her story ends, not in fire, not in blood, but in silence. The kind of silence that only follows greatness. She was never meant to be remembered, but we remember her anyway, not because of what she destroyed, but because of what she became. A warrior, a leader, a legend, and in the end, a mirror, reflecting back to us the question, what will you do with your one brief burning life? If her journey stirred something in you, if you felt the weight of her blade, the fire in her eyes, or the defiance in her silence, then don't let this be the end. Subscribe, like, share her story. Let the saga continue, not just on this channel, but in every soul that still believes courage has no gender, and legends are forged, not born. This was the untold saga of a Viking Shieldmaiden, and you were part of it.